You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Okay, now, you're just going to have to bear with me because I want to introduce this person properly. And first of all, we appreciate you coming in. Will has just lost his wife a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him to come in here, and he's very graciously said he'll come in here to do this. So our condolences to that tragedy that beset you, Will. So we appreciate you coming. But I've had a fascinating interest in this for a long time because there's so many diverse, well, not so many, the opinions on climate and what changes our weather. Social, global warming and climate change is an ongoing debate. And this man, Will Kinninmonth, has written a book called Climate Change. And I'm just going to tell you who, Climate Change, a Natural Hazard. And I'm going to read out, so just bear with me while I read out who Will is, and then we'll go from there. William Kinninmonth. Kinninmonth has a career in meteorological science and policy spanning more than 40 years. For more than a decade, he headed Australia's National Climate Centre with responsibilities for managing the data archives, monitoring Australia's changing climate, and advising the Australian government on the extent and severity of climate extremes, including the reoccurring drought episodes of the late 90s. And then he brought out a supplementary paper, which was provided to me. It's called Rethinking the Greenhouse Effect by William Kinninmonth. And this is what it says here. So just bear with me. It's only a small paragraph. The pattern of recent global warming underscores the validity of what meteorologists widely recognise. The oceans are the vital, inertial and thermal flywheels of the climate system. The corollary is, if one wants to control climate, it will be necessary to control the oceans. Efforts to decarbonise in the hope of affecting global temperatures will be in vain. Now, I'm not sure if you're listening to that and you think that runs counter to the other opinions of climate scientists who say that might not necessarily be true, but I could read out. I'm going to read this out too. This is from a man who is also a very considered person called Michael Schellenberger. He is a US climate, environment, and political commentator. And he says, this is probably to back William up, I'm not sure, I'm not putting words in William's mouth. For over a decade, Michael Schellenberger says, for over a decade, journalists have claimed that hurricanes are becoming more frequent and intense, but the data show they are not. By manipulating and misrepresenting data, reporters are being deliberately misleading. In other words, they are lying. Now, this is the basis for us asking William Kinninmonth his first question, and we appreciate you being here. Could I ask you the simple question that people, probably this goes on in many circles when people talk. William, simply speaking, are man-made carbon emissions the cause of global warming, do you think? And if you could just come a little closer, or pull the microphone closer to you, because we wouldn't want to miss a word you say, William. Thank you.
My view is that carbon dioxide is having almost negligible impact on global climate.
Well, isn't that so right there? That is extraordinary. And
Can I give you an example?
Please.
20,000 years ago, the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere was about 180 parts per million. Within 10,000 years, it had risen to 280 parts per million. And the Earth had gone from glacial conditions with ice sheets all over the northern hemisphere, the sea level 130 metres lower than it is now. The climate had come back to almost what it is now. Now, in the last 120 years, carbon dioxide concentration has gone up another 120 parts per million, in other words, equivalent to through that deglaciation period, and the change in climate is almost impossible to detect without a lot of very sophisticated instruments. We understand that, yeah, there is a bit of ice melting in the northern hemisphere, but nothing like, of course, the deglaciation that rose sea levels 130 metres. So if it was carbon dioxide that caused the deglaciation, why haven't we had this enormous climate change over the last 100 years?
So it is. So that simple explanation, not so simple, but that explanation there tends to fly in the face of. There's so many things that I got from your book, and I tried to. I couldn't write them all down, but in effect, you said it. I think you said at the Kyoto Climate Accord in 1996 or 7 in Japan. Was
97.
97,
yes.
And many people agreed with this. They said the data that was extrapolated there was so manipulated or so falsely presented, not falsely presented, it was so exaggerated, hyperbolically exaggerated to secure funding and to try and turn the opinion of something that wasn't actually real, if that is a convoluted question. Was that basically right? I could read out exactly what you said, but I'll let you do it.
Well, let me say that my real wake-up call was when I was at the presentation of the third IPCC report in Geneva in 2001. And the president of the IPCC put out all this data, which subsequently came out in the report. But he said that they've had new analyses of the last 1,000 years of temperature for the Northern Hemisphere, which shows that the temperature didn't change until industrialisation. Now that flies in the face of all of history, where we have the medieval warm period, where there was settlements in Greenland, over 3,000 settlements in Greenland. By 1500, the Little Ice Age had gripped the Northern Hemisphere, and all of those settlements were gone. In wintertime in Western Europe, all the rivers were freezing over. There was famine all over the place. And then in the 1700s, the warming started taking place again, well before industrialisation.
So this is what happens, William, when they say that there's flooding going on in recent times and the bushfires and there's winds and hurricanes, and they say they're the greatest in the last 50 years and since the turn of the century, and they say, well, if they're the greatest, and then what happens at this turn of the century and 50 years ago means they were still here then.
Well, in the paper this morning, talking about the floods up in Western New South Wales, reaching levels only reached before in 1952. So, it's happened before, and so we must expect it to happen again.
And
so can I ask,
yes,
okay, you've put up one theory. Why is there another line of thought in this argument?
Because the people who are putting out this scare scenario are reliant on computer models.
But why are they doing it? You're giving the reason why, but why are they doing it?
There's a
funding to keep them in a job.
There's a number of reasons people have been given. The IPCC was first set up as an environmental group to show that carbon dioxide was the cause. That had these computer models which had been started to be developed in the 1960s. By the 1980s, they were showing the warming was taking place. Now, I believe that those computer models are fundamentally badly structured. They are looking at what happens at the top of the atmosphere, whereas what we really should be looking at is what's happening at the surface and the energy that's taking place. Every morning, not on cloudy days like today, but when the sun comes up, the earth warms up, and it's because of the sun warming the earth, and then the air above the earth gets warmed. They're talking about the atmosphere warming and warming the surface, which is quite wrong.
And you say that climate is I think, predominantly affected by the oceans and the winds
Yes.
on the planet, and others say it's the effect of the sun and the moon's activity on the planet, and that we, and stopping cows from farting and emitting greenhouse, what is it called?
Methane.
This is just like throwing cream puffs at the town hall, is it not, William?
Well, there's so little methane in the atmosphere. They measure it in parts per billion. They measure carbon dioxide in parts per million, and they measure water vapour in parts per thousand. And water vapour is the dominant greenhouse gas. It's what keeps us warm.
So why is the Western world, America, and Australia, why are we preoccupied with climate change and global warming when people like you and many people like you and experts in the field just say that this is it is just a political push for power to control what you do and how you do it?
There was a fundamental problem arose when the international community developed this intergovernmental panel on climate change to give governments support or their global views on what is happening. And once the government signed up, and it's the intergovernmental panel, not international, it's intergovernmental, so the Australian government sends people to this panel, but then they've got to actually agree, and they do agree at the final meetings to what the IPCC brings out. And so for the government to then say, well, we're having a policy which is not in accord with the IPCC, that puts them in a bind. So they've got to follow the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel.
Could I ask you a question? It's a very layman question. A few years ago, we were all talking about the ozone layer.
Yes.
Is that still a problem, or why aren't we?
There was a hole in it, wasn't there?
Why aren't we talking about it if it's still a problem? If it's not a problem, or is a problem?
It's sort of stabilised.
Why is it stabilised?
Well, they will say because we've cut back on these fluorocarbons, the refrigerants and so forth that were being put out into the atmosphere. There's a ban on that. But there's different sorts of refrigerants now, which probably not quite as potent, but still they're doing the same sort of thing. The fluorine and chlorine are going into the atmosphere.
So is there a hole in the ozone layer?
Every winter.
So it comes and goes, does it?
Yes, every winter. Every winter over the South Pole. And so as it gets colder over there and the circulation increases, ozone, which is produced in the tropics, can't be moved down there. So it decays naturally. So you get a loss of ozone because of natural decay, and it can't be replenished.
So it's bullshit then, in layman term, that because of this ozone layer, we were getting burnt in summer. The sun was far more aggressive or whatever else as far as we as humans were concerned. So that's a furphy.
There's still as much ozone in the tropics in the very high atmosphere. And it was only just times like around about early December when this hole broke up over Antarctica and you get these eddies drifting northward, you'd get a patch of air with low ozone over Australia. And for very briefly, you would get extra ultraviolet.
Just to reinforce what I tried to say before, this is out of your book. As a consequence, nowhere is the Earth's surface temperature a function of local condition, local because the thing keeps going off, radiation characteristics alone. If it were not for the circulations of the atmosphere and the oceans, the tropics would be hotter than they are and the polar regions would be much colder.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
And to Don's point about us breathing and cows farting, and I mean, it is, in case you're wondering who Will is, and you've just tuned into this is who Will is. had joined the Australian Bureau of Meteorology in 1960, retired in 1998, and is the head of the National Climate Centre. He was a consultant to the World Meteorological Organisation's Commission for Climatology and participated in regional coordination and training programs. He is the author of the very, very interesting book of Climate Change and Natural Hazard. Are you considered as a pariah amongst your colleagues for having these not extravagant opinions, very, very thought out and planned explanation? If that all the chapters in your book are extraordinarily well researched, are you considered a pariah by your combatants?
Well, they won't discuss climate with me, put it that way,
because you have too much information.
Well, they don't want to give air to people who have different views, and so they want to dominate the media. So to have somebody come in and discuss an alternative view is not in their liking.
So why don't they want your opinion or another opinion?
Oh, because they've got their opinion, and they want to influence government and government policy.
And why do they want to influence?
Reasons.
Why? Yeah, I'm just
Funding.
trying to get.
Well, right at the beginning, in the 1980s, there was the Commission for the Future, you might remember, was established, and one of the topics it took on was the greenhouse effect, and they promoted a whole lot of conferences, and also the CSIRO then got a lot of money for computer modelling and climate modelling, which they didn't have previously, and so they've been promoting this for ever since the 80s.
Okay, can I ask again a layman's question? In my lifetime, I've seen a shift in the weathers, I suppose, over a year. I can remember as a young boy, Melbourne show, it was 100 degrees. Yes. Melbourne show at primary school, it was 100 degrees. When I went into business, it was in clothing, and I worked for Myer. They brought in summer in about August. Yes. You know, I didn't do it. I thought, this is stupid. I didn't do it until December when I went into my own business control. So are the seasons changing? No, the length, or are they?
They're variable. Yeah, we had a long drought period in the early part of this decade, century, the early 2000s. And so summer came early then. The grass has dried up. We had a lot of bushfires. It just so happens we've got a La Nina now, and for the last 3 years, and there's been a lot of rain, and the rain has persisted into the summer. And so it feels like it's, in our short memories, it has changed. But you go back into the records, and it really hasn't changed.
So you took that La Nina. We've got two currents that affect Australia. Is that right?
Well,
the Pacific and the
Indian Ocean, yes,
and the Pacific.
Yeah, it's mainly the Pacific, but it's the Indian as well. Yes.
And so, how do these currents work, please? The La Nina.
Well, I don't think we really understand how the Pacific switches from the El Nino to the La Nina. The El Nino is when it's warmer, and the La Nina is when it's cooler over in the eastern Pacific, and that has a big impact on the sort of the global atmospheric circulation. When you have an El Nino, the rain shifts from the Asian area out into the sort of eastern Pacific, and you get not only do you get droughts in Australia, you get them in India and Indonesia and New Guinea and so forth, but you also get it in northeast Brazil and to some extent in Africa because of this major shift of the circulation.
I want you to bear with me again. This is part from your book, and Don, if I stumble, it's because the phone keeps going off and I have to get the light back on it. So this is what you said. A lot has been written about the economic costs of implementing the Kyoto Protocol, which was in Japan in the late 90s, especially the flow, especially to those industrialised countries. It said that the industrialised countries, it's gone off, rely on fossil fuels have misrepresented the information that was given at the Kyoto Protocol. I'm sorry, I can't read that out accurately, but you said they distort the figures to suit their argument when there is no basis or logical reason for doing that. Did I get half that right? No, I shouldn't have.
Lost the context.
Yeah, I lost the bloody.
What about
Jesus
we as
Christ.
humans? Are we affecting? Are we overpopulating this world? Have we got an effect on climate in any way, shape, or form?
Well, we're certainly changing the landscape by clearing forests and putting in farms to grow food. And you can say go back to hunter gathering, and you couldn't support as many in the population, but there's 8 billion of us pretty soon, and
I think that mark was passed yesterday, wasn't it?
I wasn't keeping count. I just saw something there. But there's plenty of food in most places. There's food being produced and moved around. There's potential for more food to be grown, and particularly over the last sort of 50 years, as the earth has warmed up, food production has increased. So I don't see why people are talking about the dangers of global warming, because all the evidence is that the earth is greening and we're getting more food production.
The perception amongst policymakers is that the issue is beyond anthropogenic. What's that word? Anthropogenic climate change, including global warming and sea level global warming, has transcended to a political issue. That's what I was trying to suggest.
Yes.
However, what is not acknowledged is the scientific basis that is underpinned by inadequate computer models to the climate system.
That's right.
That's what I was
And so what we're doing
trying
is
to say that before.
We're closing down all our coal-fired power stations.
Yes.
Trying to replace it with gas, which is not really as much in the world as there was of coal. And
But aren't they gas? Isn't it also natural as well? The wind and sun.
Wind and sun, but when the wind is blowing and the
Yeah,
sun
I understand.
But
Yeah.
so you've got to have some sort of backup.
Yes,
when
I
it's
understand.
not.
Yep.
And so it's gas. Now, gas is a very important product for chemical feedstock, making a lot of things that we require. Fertiliser and so forth is based on natural gas. Now, if we burn it all up for energy when we could have done coal, we'll run out of it very quickly, and the earth will really be in a bad state.
How does it affect our fertiliser? How does gas affect?
Well, they make fertiliser, urea out of natural gas.
What about the islands? I read saw on the news this morning about an island disappearing in the Pacific. Nicola for one of those. Is that a real problem? Are they disappearing, and why?
There are some surveys which show that actually the coral atolls are growing, because coral grows in the warm waters.
Well, there you are.
But the coral, it does become unstable in the sense of, with time, the old coral dies and the limestone becomes unstable, and so they start to collapse. And so you get parts that are collapsing and other parts that are growing, and it's a dynamic system.
So these islands that are disappearing, the coral surrounding them is
growing.
Is disappearing, and that's why
the coral around them is still growing, just that to a large extent the old coral in the centre of the island may be sort of sinking.
Oh. So would you say the push for electric vehicles is completely out of context for the position that climate is occupying the planet, or is this is just another political ploy to control people's lifestyle? Is it or not? Not really.
You look around, let's say a city like Melbourne, and you get a lot of photo optic pollution. It's the stuff that comes out of the tailpipe of the motor cars. It becomes pollution with sunlight and so forth. Now, if you can reduce that, you'll have a much better environment for your city. So for that,
much cleaner air.
Much cleaner air. But people talk about carbon dioxide being the pollution, but it's not. Carbon dioxide is taken in by plants to make them grow. It's not a poison or anything like that. It's vital for life.
So the emissions from car exhausts give you cleaner air, which we're all in favour of. But
no.
If you
use electric vehicles, you have cleaner air.
Yes.
Yeah, no, yes, I meant that, of
Yes.
course. So the emissions that come out of fossil fuel-driven cars, they don't give you cleaner air, but they have. You're saying it has very little effect on the climate change, the change of the climate.
That's right, no.
And they're two things that are often confused. They say what comes out of a car is affecting climate change.
You'll see photographs of dirty power stations.
Yes.
And it's the sort of gaseous and particulate matter coming out that they look at, but it's not. You can't see the carbon dioxide because that's colourless and odourless. But you smell the phosphorus and other the sulphurous gases and so forth. Now, if you put half the money or even a quarter of the money that's going into renewable energy into cleaning up those smokestacks, you'd have much cleaner air.
And of course, this doesn't account for, does it, the 1,000-odd active volcanoes that spew stuff into the atmosphere and the bushfires that go on around the planet and put more stuff into the atmosphere. They'd never take that into account either.
There are satellite
are.
Monitoring of carbon dioxide, and you can see over the Amazon and over Indonesia, Northern Australia and Africa in the summertime an enormous amount of carbon dioxide coming out because of the sort of natural burning of forests.
So
Are you a lone voice? Are you a rebel? Do they think you're eccentric? What?
Well, we asked him, was he a pariah in amongst his...
put it this way.
He's answered that.
When my book came out, I had no further consultancies with the World Medical Organisation.
That's right, because you got blackballed because you had a sensible, logical explanation, and you flew in the face of people who are doing this for fiscal, funding and political reasons. I've got a feeling, William, without putting words in your mouth, I've read the book, mate, and the chapters in it are fantastic about computer modelling, solar influences, carbon dioxide and climate variability, the oceans, the transport of energy. If you want to read a book and just have a different slant on what you think's going on this planet and why we are being browbeaten into all sorts of not eating beef and all that sort of stuff.
Are you a lone voice?
Not alone, no. There are others who...
I just read Mr. Schellenberger. Jesus, Don, you've got to listen to the interview, mate. I've just read out...
One other person.
Oh,
no,
Christ
there are
almighty.
quite a number of people.
Fuck me dead.
Both in the scientific community, mainly geologists, geophysicists and so forth, who understand the length of climate and how it's changed over time. But very few people, I would say, and I don't fully understand the climate and the oceans and how they interact, but very few people understand that very completely, and even fewer, I think, understand how a climate model works. That people take climate models and they use them and they take them as if it's
gospel
truth
and manipulate them for their own political or funding advantage.
I take it
William.
that the computer models are what the old magicians used, smoke and mirrors. You see this, and here's the outcome. You don't know what goes on in between, and nobody knows very few people know how the computer models work, but they take all these outputs. And the point was that from 2001, when I said that the models were projecting warmer, almost every model that was made a projection in 2001 to the present time, the climate is not as warm as what they projected.
And they say the polar caps are melting, and Don said the sea rise is, islands are in jeopardy. Is any of that true, or has that been happening from time immemorial?
It's happening to some extent, but we talk about the global average temperature as being the key for this climate debate. And so talk about the global average temperature, we've got to keep it within 1.5 degrees. Every year, the global average temperature goes through a cycle of 2.5 degrees. That's a natural cycle.
Wow.
And the warming that's taking place is actually, most of it is over the Arctic in wintertime.
Why is that something to do with the fact that the ice radiates?
No, nothing to do with that at all.
No,
It's
good.
due to the fact that there is a little bit of extra warming taking place in the tropical oceans. More latent energy of water vapour is going into the atmosphere. That's being translated to the northern hemisphere when the winds are strongest, which is in wintertime.
So the variation of global temperature of 2.5 degrees happens on a regular annual basis.
On a regular annual basis.
And it goes up and then it comes back.
Yep.
And people just say it keeps going up, don't they?
Well, they look at the average because
Yep.
that's the convenient indicator. Now, it is warming slightly and the Earth is getting greener, but...
Which seems to be a contradiction in terms to those people who are climate... Are you a climate denier?
No, the climate is changing.
Yes.
I agree with that. But the reasons why it is changing is where I have problems with it.
Yep.
And,
So if the planet's getting greener, that should offset, or doesn't the plants emit CO2?
No, they take
Oxygen.
in CO2 and they emit oxygen.
Oh, they
Which is
take
good for
in
us-
CO2.
Which is good for us to breathe.
They are blotting paper.
But, you know,
of the planet.
People talk about the carbon dioxide and these gases in the atmosphere changing the climate. The energy in the atmosphere, so you take a column of air over the ocean, the energy in that column is equivalent to 4 metres of the energy in the ocean. Now, the oceans are about 3,000 metres deep, and the mass of the atmosphere is equivalent to the top 10 metres of the ocean. So this is why I say the oceans are the thermal and inertial flywheels of the system. Where it gets warmer, they put more heat into the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is continually cooling by radiation processes, and it's being replenished by this latent energy and heat from the surface.
Don, it's
fascinating.
amazing to have a completely rational and logical counter argument to what we are
Maybe he's just
browbeaten.
Yes, but maybe he's just in line with our mode of thinking.
Well, it's in line with our. We don't have a mode of thinking, Don. We get
Well, I
browbeaten.
do. I just
Of
think
course you
it's
do.
evolution. With the world is
No,
just
of course.
evolving.
Of course, but he William, in this book has the facts and charts and data. And I just to finish this, I'd like to once again read out. If you think we're talking to a charlatan or someone who's just wandered in here and penned a book, this is what Will is. He was a member of the Australian delegation to the Second World Climate Conference and a subsequent environmental negotiations for the Framework Convention on Climate Change. He has a close association with the early developments of climate change debate. His suspicions that science and predictions and anthropogenic, whatever that word was, global warming, had extended beyond sound theory and evidence were crystallised following the release of the third assessment report in the International Panel on Climate Change. That who is absolutely extremely well credentialed to write a book, and maybe...
Where do you get that book too, obviously?
It's called Climate Change, a Natural Hazard by William Kinninmonth. And he is a star, and I'm very grateful that he came in because we get told by all my friends, we interviewed someone here the other day, and we had a bloke come in last year and said, "Mate, you've got to stop saying all this stuff." I said, "Why?" I said, "I keep an eye on it, and there's half the world scientists say this and the other half say that. Somewhere in between, someone's either saying it for a reason that they find it benefits themselves financially, or someone is actually realistically looking at what's going on the planet, Don." And that's why we have a diverse range of opinion, and that's why we got William Kinninmonth in. And where do you get the book? Can we get the book? I'm sure people would be fascinated to get that book.
I'm not sure where you can get it at the present time because it came out in 2004.
Oh, I do.
Oh, really?
I
Yes.
see. I get you. And,
Yes.
and so you could Google it. You could. I don't know how you Google. It's called Climate Change, a Natural Hazard, and you've brought out a subsequent paper, Global Warming Policy Foundation. What was that you? That's just a.
That's the organisation who put it online. And so you can get that online, it's called.
You can get that online.
Yes.
I would tell people they'd get that online if I could. For further information about Global Warming Policy Foundation, please visit our website at www.theworldpolicyfoundation, www.thegwp.organisation.org. Fuck me. Sorry about that. You can Google William Kinninmonth and he'll tell you. William, we really appreciate you coming in. I find that fascinating. There's the book, Don. You have a glance through that. If you can understand most of that, you're a genius. But I've tried to take some small snippets out of it and read them very badly off the phone. But we appreciate you coming in to being part of You Cannot Be Serious, William Kinninmonth.
Thanks, Sam.